Thank you for tuning in to the Federalist Files. On today's show, the George Floyd case, COVID spending will cost every taxpayer $41,000, the failures of rent control, Democrats and some Republicans pushing for gun control, and finally, a crisis at the border.
I need you. I need every American to do their part. And that's not hyperbole. I need you. I need you to get vaccinated when it's your turn and when you can find an opportunity. And to help your family, your friends, your neighbors get vaccinated as well. Because here's the point. If we do all this, if we do our part, if we do this together, by July the 4th, there's a good chance you, your families and friends will be able to get together in your backyard or in your neighborhood and have a cookout or a barbecue and celebrate Independence Day. That doesn't mean large events with lots of people together, but it does mean small groups will be able to get together. After this long, hard year, that will make this Independence Day something truly special, where we not only mark our independence as a nation, but we begin to mark our independence from this virus. But to get there, we can't let our guard down. This fight is far from over. As I told the woman in Pennsylvania, I'll tell you the truth. On July 4th, with your loved ones, is the goal. But a lot can happen.
As always, thank you for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. There's a lot to unpack there. So we had the 15 days to slow the spread. Now we're talking about July 4th. We're going to keep going until July 4th. Right now, the current administration, according to some reports that I read, they are scrambling because they have ramped up the production of vaccine, but they have found that the amount of people getting vaccines is beginning to slow because the people at risk, usually the older people with comorbidities, are getting the vaccination, and then other people that are younger just are not, which I predicted. I said that was going to happen. Additionally, the media is fawning over the obviously, this was his speech. He gave this on Thursday. He did not address the media. A lot of people are coming out saying that they probably pre-recorded this speech because he took no questions from the media, and that was the main criticism of Joe Biden, is that he has yet to hold a comprehensive news conference with the news media because he is beyond criticism. The real answer to that question is that he is cognitively deteriorating at a very rapid pace. I was just listening to Dan Bongino's podcast the other day, and he was saying he has information, he has sources on the inside saying that he's, it's a very rapid pace in which his cognitive acuity is declining. So he comes out, gives this little speech, gives this, July 4th is going to be the day. We all need to get together. This weird groupism, this groupthink that goes on with the Democrat Party, with the liberal class, where they think that everybody's always in things together. And at the end of the day, no one pays my bills, so I don't necessarily know what they're talking about. I'm sure nobody pays your bills either from the Democrat Party, so I'm going to go through some of that. I'm going to go through George Floyd case. I actually have a lot of information on the BLM movement that I acquired while BLM was burning down cities during the summer. And I didn't have this podcast at the time, so I had a lot of information that I acquired. I'm going to go through a little bit of stuff, nothing really crazy, and then maybe I'll hit back on it depending on how this case ends up playing itself out. Because of I have to pretty much counteract everything that the media does, because everything the media does is antithetical to data. They don't come out with any type of empirical study or data. Statistics coming from the FBI, uniform crime statistics. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to come out if they continue to propagate the BLM movement or continue to propagate that all cops are bad and all cops are evil and they're going out and killing black people en masse. Then I'm going to have to go through all the studies, and everyone will have to sit through that lesson, but it'll be very good for you out there that have friends that believe in the BLM hoax It's not the statement. Black Lives Matter is not the statement that anyone disagrees with. It's the group. It's the Marxist organization, rather, that people disagree with, and that's just a common misconception from the left. They think that the conservatives disagree with the notion that Black Lives Matter. That is not the case. The case is that people disagree with the group. They disagree with the group actions. As soon as you get into group think, that is what will happen. You will have groups that you just need one or two bad actors, and then it spreads like wildfire. It spreads like cancer. In this specific organization, the founders are Marxists. They came on CNN, I think it was CNN, and they admitted openly that they are Marxist, trained in tactics, in Marxism, or what have you. So you get this speech comes out from Biden. The media comes out. They're fawning over him, and the answer to everybody now is wear your mask. We're going to continue to ramp up vaccinations. Go get your vaccine. We need everyone in this together all of the time. It's such a group ideology. It's such a groupism. Oh, we need to all do this together. Like, everyone's so nice with each other. We're asking for everyone to unify behind this president. And I'm going to go through at the very end of this podcast, and even in the middle, when I go through some of the economics that are going to transpire over these next couple of years due to the influx of government spending, you're going to see the disparity, or they're calling for union, they're calling for unity, but they don't want unity by their legislative actions. So check out, this is the media. I have Chuck Todd as well as Van Jones at the very end here. Chuck Todd, MSNBC, and then Van Jones on CNN. They are fawning over on Thursday's speech. It was a 23-minute speech, folks, and it was just as pathetic as that 1.5 minutes that I showed you. Play 3.
Look, on paper, they have not set any promises they haven't met yet. And that, to me, is probably the biggest theme of this speech, is that what the president is trying to sell is competency. He's trying to say, look, we know you lost a little bit of faith in government, and maybe you've lost a little bit of faith in, but look what we're doing, and this is what government does when it does well. And so I thought, thematically, the most important thing out of this for me was him selling the good that he believes government can do.
And I think part of his message was, we're here to help you. Government is not the deep state. And as he said, it's not some capital somewhere. He said, we're here to help you. And so, you have to, believe me, you have to restore your trust and your faith in what we are doing, and understand that we're not lying to you, and we want you to get the vaccine, not because of any political statement, and we want you to wear a mask, not because of a political statement, but because it will save lives and get us out of this pandemic.
And I think it's a deeper kind of patriotism. There's this kind of cheaper patriotism that separates the American people from America's government, and says, I love America's people, I hate America's government. And he said, the government is us. It's a democracy.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to debunk. There's a lot to dismantle there. To start off, Van Jones, our government is not a democracy. It's a representative republic that has democratic means of election in a lot of cases, not all cases. So he's wrong, obviously, there. It's amazing. You have these journalists. All you're in charge of doing is covering politics. And you don't know absolutely anything about the foundation of politics. You don't even understand the type of government in which it has been devised here. You don't even know that. You're so unaware. You lack the intelligence, or I don't even know if it's necessarily the intelligence. You just lack the information that is so easy to obtain. You have this. You have a phone. You have all this information at your disposal, and you just choose not to use any of it. And I don't necessarily know if it's purposeful or not. I don't know. The woman before him. And even Chuck Todd says, promises made, promises kept, pretty much. That was his whole MO there. And government is here to help you. Folks, government is not here to help you in any case. Government is here to hurt you, especially in this current climate. The government is not here to help you. Printing more and more money, lowering interest rates. And everybody, it sounds good when you lower interest rates. I'm going to explain later in this show. Lowering interest rates does not help you out. Printing more money also does not help you out. There is nothing that the government has done thus far that has helped anybody. Maybe it may have displaced the rights of some in favor of others. That's probably the only thing I could possibly think of that the current administration has done. to truly help people. Now telling everybody we're going to get 100 million vaccinations in 100 days when we were already at pace of doing 1 million every single day isn't really an accomplishment. It's just saying we're going to follow the status quo that the current administration before us had, and we followed through with it, and we were successful in doing so. So, but just the idea, folks, that the government, and I thought it was very essential that I played this clip because that's going to be the premise of this. The government is not here. This is the premise of my show in general. The government's not here to help you. And they say, oh, the people don't trust in the government. The government's here to... The fact that we have the media telling people, and this is the legacy media. I don't even like to call them the mainstream media because I just personally, I don't think that they are actually the mainstream of America. I don't think that the main, middle class workers actually appreciate the media, especially the left wing media. In that case, they propagate these ideas. They carry the water of the administration. They don't even criticize. The point of the media being there is supposed to be an extra safeguard for the people against the government. They are supposed to criticize the government. The media doesn't even criticize the government. The government is beyond reproach in this case. It is absolutely reprehensible. We need to have a free country. We need a challenging and critical media, which we currently do not. We are not in that state right now. So first, I'm going to go over George Floyd. They are having his court case. His family just got paid $27 million before the case even started. But apparently, jurors have been already benched at this time, which people are saying the case should be thrown out because they're already paying out the town or the city already paid the family out, which would affect the court case, which actually has a very good premise there behind that. It's a speedy, I think it's like a fair and speedy trial, impartial jury of your own peers, all that. They're going through jurors like absolutely like crazy. I think they're like in the 40s or 50s on jurors because they're getting people that come out. And I think truly because this is a public case, which they should have attempted to make it private, people don't even want to be on the jury, either way that they feel. Especially people that are on the right leaning or don't believe in the BLM movement, in the Marxist terrorist group, as well as Antifa. They don't agree with those principles. They don't want to even be on the case. They'll say anything to get themselves off that bench, off the jury bench, because they're afraid for their lives, because a lot of this is now going to leak out as public information. So I have a clip. They had this memorial where George Floyd Memorial was. You have a reporter, I don't even know what news station he's from. I believe he's from the local news station. And he is at the autonomous zone. So what has happened is BLM and Antifa have held down at the autonomous zone now, they're calling it, where the George Floyd Memorial is. So play 5.
This area behind me is the George Floyd Memorial. This is where George Floyd was killed back in May. Take a look. These barricades have been set up by protesters and supporters of the movement. They don't allow anyone in, not even the police. It's called an autonomous zone. And
you're going to be in a bad situation here in a second.
oh, I thought if we were on this side of the barricade,
You're going to be in a bad situation in a second.
what do you mean by
Because
bad
you've been called out
situation?
for what you are. You need to get out of here.
Please go.
You mean on this side of the
We know
barricade?
what you are. You need to get in your car and go.
We're just media.
I don't give a who you are.
Go ahead,
You've been
go.
called out for who you are. You need to get in your car.
A reporter, he gets called out by the people that are holding down the autonomous zone. The one guy is pretty much threatening him, saying, you're gonna be in trouble in a couple of minutes. You need to get out of here. You've been called out for what you are. Get out of here. The whole thing. I don't know what that necessarily means. I guess because he's the media, he can't be there in this autonomous zone. And this is anarchy, folks. This is pretty disgusting display of anarchy that has transpired over these last couple of months in a lot of these big liberal cities, and the government is nowhere to be found. This is the only time the government's actually supposed to step in, is violent factional violence, they call it, or rather insurrections. And the only time the government's actually supposed to step in and do something about it, and the government on this case, even during the Trump administration, has been absolutely just stagnant. They have done nothing to help the people, because then you have that clip, it goes further. And then this woman, her nephew just passed away actually in the autonomous zone. Apparently he got shot or something. He got shot by another person that was there, because it's absolutely anarchy. The mob rules in that area. And he's 18 years old, her nephew, he got shot. Asked, oh, why didn't the cops go in there? Well, the cops weren't allowed. If the cops could go in there and the EMS can go in that zone, maybe they could have saved his life, but you can't do anything when he's in that zone. They're not allowed in there because the cops aren't, first off, the cops aren't allowed in there, or else they'll get accosted and they'll get attacked or whatever. Me personally, I think that the government owes it to the people that live in that area that suddenly now Antifa and BLM have shut down. They owe it to those people that live in those areas to weed BLM and Antifa out of that area. At the end of the day, that's what they need to do. It's to be a military or a police force answering those people that are just holding really these civilians and their lives at hostage. So to get to the George Floyd autopsy, I'm sure that a lot of liberals, if you're listening, are going to get super angry at me because I'm even talking about this. But this is all the information about the autopsy. Now, the private autopsy that was done by the family was not admitted into court because they didn't see the grounds of it. I guess the credentials of the person that conducted the autopsy, the medical examiner, were not legitimate. Thus, the reason for them only admitting this specific autopsy. It is the Hennepin County medical examiner case. I have the link, as always. Everything will be referred to in the show notes. It'll be the description below. This one in particular would be called the George Floyd autopsy. It's directly the PDF file. It's something like 20 pages long. I read the whole thing. It's not really... I only took certain specific aspects of it. So to start off, they did record blunt force injuries. Cutaneous blunt force injuries of the forehead, face, and upper lip. Cutaneous is in their cuts. He had cuts on his lip, his face, and that was probably when he was planted into the ground. When he was moving his face all over the place on the ground. Mucosal injuries of the lips. I don't exactly know what that is. Cutaneous blunt force injuries to his shoulders, hands, elbows, and legs, and that's probably the struggle on the ground that they had with him. Paterned contusions. Contusions is his bruising of the wrists, consistent with handcuffs. So that's what the bruises on the wrist are from. So they also recorded natural diseases that he has. In this case, he had a hypertensive heart disease. His cardiomegaly, 540 grams with mild biventricular dilation. So apparently he had a clinical history of hypertension, and he had heart disease. And he had arteriosclerical heart disease. Okay, so that's the heart disease. And he also had a left pelvic tumor, which had nothing to do with this case, but he just had that on his body, which is kind of weird. No life-threatening injuries, though. Due to all these cuts, really he had cuts and bruises, essentially. He also had a pre-existing condition of heart disease. In this case, I think what ended up happening is he passed away from heart failure due to drug intoxication. That's what the medical examiner is concluding in this case. So no life-threatening injuries were identified. No facial, oral, mucosal, or conjunctival, whatever that word is, no injuries of anterior muscles of neck so there was no injuries of his neck or his throat, like laryngeal structures. No scalp, soft tissue, skull, or brain injuries. So he had no life-threatening internal injuries here. No chest wall, soft tissue injuries. Rib fractures other than a small rib fracture from CPR. So he had no rib fractures. The only one he did is when they tried to resuscitate him and give him CPR, which commonly happens when they try to do that. Vertebral column injuries or visceral injuries. So they didn't have any of that. Incision and subcutaneous dissection of posterior and lateral neck, shoulders, back, flanks, and buttocks, negative for occult trauma. So they cut him. I mean, I hate to say this, it's very visual, but he pretty much cut him open, and they found that they didn't find any type of life-threatening injuries that were sustained during this period. So you say, why is it that? Because the media, they've been propagating, and don't get me wrong, the way in which the cop handled the situation, I mean, I'm not trained that way. They may have actually been trained to handle the situation that way. I don't exactly know. I know that there's a certain type of center mass. You usually, from what I understand, is you would put the knee on the center mass behind the, like, behind the neck, almost like in the middle of your chest, on your back. From what I understand, they want to control the middle base. I don't think usually the scenario is that you knee on somebody's neck. I'm not 100% sure, though. And I also don't know the amount of pressure that was being applied. Thus, the reasoning for them saying that there was no life-threatening injuries and there was nothing in his neck that went wrong in this case. But more importantly, the blood, drug, and novel psychoactive substance screening is absolutely ridiculous. So they have fentanyl. They had 11 nanograms per millimeter or milliliter, and that is a deadly dose apparently. And I have some what they said was a deadly dose here. So they have fentanyl, norfentanyl, ANPP, I'm not sure exactly what that is, methamphetamines, hydroxydelta, that's marijuana, but apparently it was the non-active marijuana, so at this time he was not high, but he had marijuana in his system. Cotinine, caffeine. So cotinine is also known as like nicotine, so maybe he was smoking a cigarette or something. He was negative for ethanol, methanol, isopropanol, acetone. So he didn't have any of those in his system. Urine drug screen, presumptive positive for cannabinoids, amphetamines, and fentanyl metabolite. Urine drug screen confirmation, morphine. He also had 86 nanograms per milliliter of that in his system as well when he went to take his urine test. Well, I guess they somehow were able to pull his urine from his bladder. So they have the amount of fentanyl he had in his system at that time was 11 nanograms per milliliter. So signs associated with fentanyl toxicity include severe respiratory depression, seizures, hypotension, coma, and death. And fatalities from fentanyl blood concentrations are variable and have been reported as low as 3 nanograms per milliliter. So this guy had more than 3 times the deadly dose of fentanyl in his system. And if you actually watch the video, and it's not the video when the knee's on the neck for, I think, something like 8 minutes, it is the video beforehand. It's before that interaction. It's before he's on the ground. He is saying to the officers, he's saying, I can't breathe. He's sitting in his car saying he can't breathe. He's standing outside his car saying he can't breathe. So he was definitely having some issues with drugs. And then if you actually go through the full toxicity report, I can't even name half the things that are on there, but this fentanyl is just so deadly. He was taking whatever was in whatever drugs he was on, the fentanyl, that it was like a cocktail of drugs. There was morphine in it. There was just so many. I was looking up all the different names. There's just so many different forms of different drugs because these drugs are probably made over in China. They're made in a vat. So they don't clean the vats out. They just take it, they mix it up in the same vat that all this other stuff was also made in. So he had a combination, pretty much a drug cocktail in his system. And from this report, it seems like what he died from was an overdose, as well as having that pre-existing heart condition, which caused heart failure in this case. From what it seems like off of this autopsy, and people are saying, oh well, do you think him being in that high stress situation could have killed him? It made his heart rate faster, what have you. Yeah, that could be the case, but it's not the case that he died from his a knee on his neck that cut off his air circulation. And that's just not the case, folks. As well as they went through his lungs and everything too, and pretty much everything with his lungs were fine as well. So this is to debunk the myth. We have this police brutality against black people has been much less than what the public thinks. And they have a study here that I found off Skeptic Research in their report. And part of the reason is because the media is full of it and they just lie about everything to the people. That's part of the reason why. This has been propagated much more than it needs to be, I guess you would say. There's cases like this for white people. Tony Tempa comes to a name. I think he was an Arizona man. There's also this video I remember in Arizona where there was a guy that the cop made him get on the ground, and he did absolutely nothing wrong in this case. He was in like a hotel or something. They made him crawl to them, and then he went to, as he was on the ground, he went to go grab, because his pants were pretty much falling down. It's a pathetic. I don't even want to show the video. It's so pathetic. He went to go pull his pants up because they were literally falling down, and they can openly see it. The cops, they're right there, and they just blow him away as soon as he goes to pull his pants up because they think it's a weapon. But the way in which they handled the situation was completely just unnecessary and too much. And I think it's part of the reason is because cops, when they commonly handle people, they're always in high stress situations all the time, so they think anything can pop off at any time, which is a way, I guess, that you would think if you're always, every single interaction that you have, if 90% of your interactions, or even 10% of your interactions daily are a deadly interaction, then you are ready, like at all times. You're hyped and you're ready to go at all times. Not in a, I don't mean with a negative connotation. It's just a way. It's unfortunately just probably the way that the job works. And obviously, there's that, there's better testing and then, better training. There's all that happens, all those conversations. And then the left wants to defund the police, which is not the answer. Defunding the police is what you end up getting over in Minnesota right now, or in Minneapolis, where you have autonomous zones and there's no answer from the citizens, and they can't count on any police officers to do anything because there's no funding. So this is a study that was conducted by the Skeptic Research Center, where they took a poll. How many unarmed black men were killed by police in 2019? It's a question. So people that identify their political orientation as you can see by the chart, very liberal, they said, how many unarmed black men were killed by police in 2019? 31% of them thought about 1,000, while 15% of them thought 10,000. You got another 30% of them thinking that it's about 100, and then more than 10,000, 7% of them thought that more than 10,000 unarmed black men were killed by police in 2019, which is outrageous. Those numbers are outrageous. The real number is, through the Washington Post, by the way, this is the source of the Washington Post, they estimate from 13 to 27, depending on, because every single scenario is different variables, whether they consider a bat being armed or not. There's all these specific different scenarios that need to be met, requirements that need to be met to say this is an unarmed case. But at most 27 in 2019 unarmed black men were killed by police. So that's not even close to 100. It's not close to 1,000. It's not close to 10,000. So of the very liberal, only 15% of them got the question right. The liberals, actually more of them think that about 100 unarmed black men were killed by police. They think 38% of them think that. And then as you get more and more further to the right, the conservatives actually, because we study these things, we know much more than the liberals do. The conservatives, 47% thought it was about 10, and then very conservative, 46% of them thought it was about 10. They're much more in the range of 10 to 100, which is much more reasonable of a range than 10,000 or 100,000. More than 10,000. So you have liberals en masse thinking, 1 in 4 liberals in this case thought that about 1,000 of them, unarmed black men, were killed by police in 2019. That's just liberals. The very liberal, 31%, so like 1 out of every 3 of them thought. So this is all these sources and this data, the research, the specific political orientation research is the Skeptic Research Center. But all the data that this is comprised from is straight from the Washington Post. It's all in the study that I have available for you. It's all linked to the study. Here's another one here. In 2019, what percentage of people killed by police were black? So of the very liberal, the number for them was 60%. For the liberal, it was 56%. For the moderate, 45%. Conservative, 37%. And very conservative, 44%. So it goes up a little bit for very conservative people, which is interesting. The real number, and this is straight from the Washington Post database, is 24.9%. So pretty much everyone's wrong. There's an overestimation from all political groups right now how many unarmed black men are being killed by police each year, or what percentage of people are killed by police each year that are black. which isn't surprising because you believe it at this point. You believe in these high rates because the media propagates the story that black people are being killed en masse, and that's I think what LeBron said, something like that. Black people are being killed en masse by police, and they all know it's not true. They don't do the studies, they don't have the numbers, they just have these anecdotal situations, and then from those anecdotes, they draw their own conclusions on that instead of actually looking up statistics and data on it. So next, what I have, because of some of these propagated myths, check out and we're talking about insurrections. We have in Portland, and this has been going on for months now, probably almost 6 months. Well, actually, probably more than 6 months at this point. Yeah, probably more, probably 8 months. Been going on. They have been fighting the cops relentlessly, Antifa and BLM. Play 10. This has been a question that's been ongoing for months now. If you have January 6th, if you want to classify that as a riot or a insurrection, a violent insurrection, usually, like I said, throughout history, insurrections have been armed insurrections. They found that nobody had weapons on them or nobody had guns on them on January 6th. If you want to classify that as an insurrection, then what is this and this has been ongoing for months. Antifa has been trying to burn down this federal courthouse for a very long time now at this point, where they finally come out and they're fighting the cops back and forth. They've been doing this in Portland, Oregon. And at first the mayor would back down. The mayor technically, through the law in that city, he is the commissioner of the police as well, which is a problem because he's the softest human being probably ever imaginable. So he's taking no moves. He tried to concert with these people. He tried to become friendly with them, and then they pretty much boot him off the stage. And at this point now, they need to start enforcing their laws. And I think they actually just recently opened back up the federal courthouse thinking, okay, well, they're not going to attack us. And then the George Floyd case gets stirred back up. And now they're back at the federal courthouse. And now here's another thing. This ideology, this leftism, this critical race theory, this whole, your white privilege, all of this information. This is the reason for this and why this is a Marxist movement is because this is pernicious. This is pernicious to our country. It's pernicious to our founding, a lot of our principles in this country, that everybody's an individual with their own individual rights and has their own free will to do as they please. That's being taken over. That's the point of this movement. The point of this movement is to reject or to repudiate founding principles and exchange them for this giant groupthink, groupism. You need to bend the knee to the cultural mob, in other words. And I have another clip, and this is pathetic. This is out of Louisville in Kentucky. These are girls, young girls. They're literally like kids. They're going to a cheerleading competition, and on the corner you have the BLM, Antifa protesters. Play 7.
Do something black today with your white privilege besides cheer. Do something black today with your white privilege besides cheer. The reason why you get to be here in these pretty gorgeous outfits with your gorgeous hair and your gorgeous dome is because of your white privilege. Brianna is dead. Black mothers are burying their babies while white mothers send their daughters to cheer competitions. Black mothers are burying their babies while white mothers send their children to cheer competitions. Do something black today with your white privilege. Thank you. Do something black today with your white privilege. Thank you.
These people are losers, folks. These people are absolute losers. If you think it's the idea that's exalted that if you decide to not bend the knee to our ideology, then you are now complicit. You are complicit with the government. That's the ideology. That's the thought process here through the left. Do something, and the lady was yelling at them, do something black with your white privilege today. You have the privilege because you get to go to a cheerleading competition. And my question would be, are there no black cheerleaders? Has that ever happened before? So next I'm going to go over all the spending in this next spending bill. But first I want to play a clip of John Kennedy from Louisiana Senator on his characterization of the bill. Play 5.
President Biden says it's a a coronavirus bill. And my response is right, and the stripper really likes you.
The dad jokes and the puns that come from John Kennedy are tremendous. So first I want to start off. The FEE has some articles that I'm going to go through. Today I think I have two from them. It is I think it's the Foundation for Economic Education. It said 90% of spending bill is not directly related to COVID. That's the name of the piece, written by Brad Palumbo. COVID spending, and just for the record, COVID spending has been 8 times more than FDR's inflation-adjusted New Deal. So if you took the New Deal that was passed by FDR in the I think it was the 1939, I want to say, the 1940s, the New Deal was passed. If you adjusted it for inflation, the COVID spending has been 8 times more than that. The sheer immensity of the spending is hard to grasp. For context, $6 trillion is more than 1/4 of what the U.S. economy produces in an entire year, according to Fox Business. So that's how much we've spent so far. It's been $6 trillion. The COVID spending blowout is at least 8 times bigger than the inflation-adjusted price tag of President FDR's New Deal. Moreover, the COVID spending bills all lost huge sums of money to unrelated carve-outs, politician pet projects, corporate bailouts, fraud, waste, and worse. In the latest $1.9 trillion package, more than 90% of the spending is not directly related to containing COVID-19. Only 1% of the money, about 15 to 20 billion, is spent on vaccines. Meanwhile, hundreds of billions go to bailing out poorly managed state governments, budget holes that predate the pandemic, and $86 billion of rescue failing pension plans. Meanwhile, billions more go to Obamacare expansion and subsidizing public schools long after the pandemic. So there's another thing. They were giving more and more funding in 2022 and 2023 to school systems through this COVID bill, which has nothing to do with COVID. And that's the point of the bill. You have 90% of the spending, which is not directly related with containing COVID-19. It's supposed to be called this COVID-19 bill. And then another $86 billion rescuing failing pension plans. And that was where I mentioned that before, where I had someone in my family, a family friend, works in the trucking industry, and the drivers, now their pension's fine because of this bill. They passed this bill literally to fund private pensions, which makes absolutely no sense. For the same $6 trillion in expenditure, the government could have given every federal taxpayer a $41,870 check. Or they could have written every single American a check for $18,000. That's how much money was spent here. They could have written every single American an $18,000 check, and every single federal taxpayer $41,000. Which, I mean, federal taxpayers. So essentially, that has cost every single federal taxpayer $41,000. This whole thing, all these COVID relief, quote unquote relief bills, more like spending bills. Only someone who fully collected expanded unemployment benefits throughout the pandemic and received all 3,200 in total of the stimulus payments likely received more than 18,000, and that's a relatively small fraction of the public. So they're saying people that really took advantage of these social systems are the only ones that actually would have maybe even got close to the benchmark of $18,000. Too often, the stimulus conversation is simply framed around whether we should give money to a certain group of people or program rather than also including the trade-offs and costs. The question isn't just, should we send people $1,400 stimulus checks? It is instead, should we send people $1,400 stimulus checks at the cost of taking the equivalent amount from other people? It's not just whether we should send $350 billion for state and local governments, but should we do so at the cost of taking an average of $2,400 per federal taxpayer? So all of these bailouts to state and local governments cost each individual taxpayer $2,400. So just thank your federal government for that. The government cannot create wealth out of thin air. It can only give anyone anything via 3 different ways. So just to understand everything, the government, them printing more money, them handing money out, that is not them creating wealth. They do not create wealth out of thin air. The only way in which they can hand money and redistribute money is the following 3 ways. Directly increasing taxes, which discourages economic growth and directly takes money away from people. Running up debt, which means much higher taxes in the future plus interest. Creating a drag on economic growth. And printing money, which stealth taxes the public via inflation. I went over this in my last one. When you go to print money, or two podcasts ago, when you print money, it's essentially a closeted form of taxation because it lowers the amount of debt that's owed to the government. It's much easier for them to pay the debt, and then it also it inflates or deflates, really. It depreciates the money that you have sitting in the bank. The money could be $1,000. Now that money's only really worth $500. So every single way that the government does anything here is just any government intervention in general in the economy I'm usually opposed to. In this case, it's very bad. And this was something I was talking about even while the Trump administration was in there, the COVID spending and how much of a waste it was. So and then I have another article here, 57 billion of hidden taxes in the COVID spending bill. This is a Just the News piece. It's written by Nicholas Balassi. The final version of the legislation expands the number of employees who are covered by the $1 million limitation on the deductibility of executive compensation. According to the National Law Review, Section 162M of the tax code generally prohibits a public company from deducting more than $1 million in compensation paid to a current or former covered employee in a taxable year, and under current law, the covered employees are the chief executive officers, chief financial officer, and the three other highest compensated officers for the taxable year. The executive compensation deduction change in the stimulus bill covers 5 more of a company's highest paid employees. Supposed to gain revenue. So they threw this into the COVID bill that usually there was some sort of a tax deduction or a tax exemption on executive employees because their pay is usually astronomical. In this COVID bill, they made it so you couldn't deduct as many as you could before. They made a limitation on that. So they think through this will cause them to gain more in revenue on taxation because executives are going to have to pay the tax, these companies, on the executives, which just, I don't think that's the case. I don't think they're going to gain any revenue on this. I think that companies will just move out or they'll find some sort of way to subvert it, as always. And off of that principle there, I have another article talking about the gig economy. So we're worried right now about companies moving out of the United States. And that's going to, that with some of these policies that they are pushing, that could be in the near future. So Biden, he endorses a law that jeopardizes 57 million jobs. This is a Washington Examiner piece written by Brad Palumbo. And I think all my federal economic was also written by Brad Palumbo. So yeah, this is a big Brad Palumbo day. He does good work. So it starts off, House Democrats recently reintroduced the PRO Act, which among many sweeping reforms would make many commonplace forms of independent contractor or freelance arrangements illegal. It's based on a California law that was so dysfunctional, even voters in the very blue states voted to change it. The administration strongly encourages the House to pass the PRO Act and looks forward to working with the Congress to enact this critical legislation that safeguards workers' rights to organize and bargain collectively, the White House said. The PRO Act will strengthen our democracy and advance dignity in the workplace, end quote. Man, this was tried. They attempted to do this in California with Uber and Lyft. The people actually rejected it because then they realized that their Uber and Lyft rides would cost, exorbitant sums of money. And the reason for this is that they want to cut out the freelance work. If you work so many hours if you work in a general sense, you automatically have to be considered a full-time employee through this act. And I'll give you the groundwork here. They lay it out in this piece. So it purports to stop workers from being misclassified as freelancers in order to force companies to hire them full-time. But the PRO Act's redefinition of freelance workers is so narrow that a worker can only provide a company with a freelance service that is outside its normal purview. For example, Uber is a driving company. It couldn't hire as drivers as freelancers, but it could potentially hire a janitor as a freelancer. That's the way the rules go. Essentially, flexible freelance jobs such as Uber drivers or part-time newspaper columnists would be illegal in their current forms. Some people might get hired on full-time as a result, but many people would lose work altogether, and many freelancers don't want to be full-time employees. It's often the flexible schedule and ad hoc arrangement that draws stay-at-home mothers to freelance writing or after-hours workers to their Uber side hustle. I'm going to go on to explain actually how successful this idea of freelance work is and how well people do that are in the freelancing industry. But first, even this writer writing this article in this column, Brad Palumbo, he alludes to this. What he's currently doing under this new federal statute, if it's passed through, would be illegal. He cannot be a freelance columnist. He cannot write columns and then send it out to different news organizations and have them printed. He would have to be an actual full-time employee of one of these news organizations. So this takes away the freedom of the employer, but it also takes away the freedom of the worker themselves in choosing what they can and can't do as a freelancer. I want to say he actually is employed by the Federal Economic Growth whatever committee. I think he might be employed there, but then he also writes things on the side where he makes money, which is good for him. It's essentially a side hustle, as they refer to it in the piece. So it goes on. More than 70% of 1099 gig workers say they are working independently by their own choice, not because they can't find a 9-to-5 job. So 1099 workers would be those freelance workers. 70% of them say it's not because they can't find a 9-to-5 job. They're doing it under their own, on their own freedom. They're doing it because they want to. It's their own independent choice. So freelancing can pay well too. According to 2019 survey, a whopping 40% of gig economy workers, which are freelancers, earn more than $100,000 annually, while another 35.7% make from $50,000 to $100,000. And of course, being your own boss, choosing which projects to accept, and having a flexible schedule are pretty damn attractive perks. He says, darn, I said, damn. The PRO Act would take all this away from millions of independent contractors whom liberal elites have declared misclassified or exploited. And that's the common theme. Biden claims this is a pro-labor reform, but polling consistently shows that actual freelancers don't support or want the PRO Act. Ironically, representatives of almost every worker group lobbied hard for exemptions from this pro-labor law when it passed in California. Interesting. Yeah, this is not pro-labor. The labor unions might want it, but it says every single one lobbied hard against it, which I think is very interesting. But I think the labor unions might actually want this because this would help them push their pay up as well. Uber nearly had to shut down operations in the Golden State altogether because of this. Freelance journalists and writers based in California were laid off by the hundreds. Florists, musicians, translators, and countless other kinds of workers were hurt by the regulatory crackdown, with almost no one actually benefiting from it. So if you have a cleaning company, you hire people freelance. Let's say they only want to work once a week. They want to work on Saturdays, and your cleaning company, you have to lay them off because they have some sort of other job. It's taking away the right of the worker if they want to. And this is the idea, is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says everybody's working 2 jobs just to get by. That's not the truth. People are working 2 jobs because they want to make extra money. That's the reason for the second job. The second job is not because they're trying to get by. Statistically, it's just not true. Especially by this study, it shows what 75% of these people that do freelancing make $50,000 to more than $100,000 a year. Because of this freelancing it's an incentive-based structure, it's merit-based, you want to work harder to create more capital for yourself, have more in the bank, or invest it. So next what I have, and this is a very long piece about, and I'm definitely going to go over today because I took pretty long on that first segment, the George Floyd case, but that's okay. It's a weekend special, it's all right. Rent control making a comeback in the U.S. as it fails in Europe. And this is another federal economic freedom, what are they called? The Foundation for Economic Education.org piece. It's written by John Militimore. It's talking about how the Minneapolis is not the only U.S. city or state where politicians are seeking to impose rent controls because of rising housing prices. And then they talk about other places. They talk about Downey, California, Ashbury Park. It's probably Asbury Park, New Jersey. And rent control policies are once again being debated at the local level, according to Minneapolis City Council. Some 180 local governments across the country have passed rent control in some form or another. Meanwhile, in 2019, Oregon passed the first statewide rent control law in the U.S. In most cases, rent control policies are a response to an economic reality. Rent prices are often too high, especially in urban areas, eating up 40 to 45% of the median salary on average in some cities. So people are paying almost half of their salary in some of these big cities to live here. That's the point, the whole rent control. And the debate here and what's wrong is the remedy is wrong by the liberals. The remedy from the liberals is we got to control it. We got to make the government tell people how much it is that they can charge for rent control. The problem is you're throwing an artificial wrench into the economy. It should be done through a market-based structure, a supply and demand, and I'll explain why that structure works much better than the rent control structure. So he cites Berlin, February 2020. They introduced this in a cap on rent in Berlin. They had these pricey rents. They drove out a lot of lower middle class residents, so they put a cap on it. They applied to properties built prior to 2014. So anything that was built before 2014, that was kept at a very low price, freezing rent at 2019 levels. But anything that was new would end up being, you're thinking, okay, so anything that's new, there was no type of price freeze. So that's the free market there. Anything that was new built after 2014, there was no rent control on. Everything built before 2014, there was rent control. So he goes on why this has been a failure, and it's shown to be a failure. If I could find specifically what he's referring to. Unsurprisingly, the rent controls have split housing in Berlin into two distinct markets. The much larger one, consisting of all apartments built before 2014, which is now regulated, and the smaller unregulated one of relatively new buildings. Citing new research from 4 economists at Munich's Institute, Cloth shows rent prices have surged in the unregulated market, rising faster than the average growth in the 13 next largest cities. So he's going to go on to explain why the unregulated market has done way better than how in the very beginning it caused all the unregulated market for the rent prices to go up. And the reason they ended up going up is because there was now a shortage. So anything that was built after 2014, it was pretty much impossible to get into those houses. If I could find exactly where he says that. He talks about rent control is a destructive policy. In his book, Basic Economics, Thomas Sowell spends entire chapters documenting the failures of rent control policies around the world, from Australia and Sweden to New York and San Francisco. So by having this rent control in these apartments, right, and then not having it in the unregulated market, you cause the unregulated market to surge. There was much more expensive pricing because people legitimately would buy and they would hold whatever their rent was in those apartments that were built prior to 2014. And because of that, there was a supply and demand. There was a high demand, but there was absolutely no supply there. So then they would go to the unregulated market, which caused those prices to soar. But because those prices soared, they were able to make more and more. There was much more of a demand, thus, because there was no regulation on it, there was more of a supply that came out. And he goes on to state here, rent control also has adverse effects on the demand for housing. Because properties are priced below market rates, people tend to consume more than they otherwise would. In some cases, Thomas Sowell points out, this has resulted in housing shortages in the absence of actual scarcity, such as Sweden in the 1950s, which saw the average wait time for a place to live reach 40 months, which is about 3.5 years, even though Sweden was building more housing per person than any nation in the world. As of 1948, there were 2,400 people on waiting lists for housing in Sweden, But a dozen years later, the waiting list had grown to 10 times as many people despite a frantic building of more housing, Sol writes. When actually rent control laws were repealed in Sweden, a housing surplus suddenly developed as rents rose and people curtailed their use of housing as a result. So, just the best way to try to break it down here. So when you have a system like this, the real answer is when the rent is too high, the answer is to deregulate the market and to allow, the real problem is, especially in these big cities, to get the permits to build is so exorbitant and so expensive because the city government is looking to confiscate money from the builder. They're looking to just pretty much take money from the builder. When their investment is $200,000, and then on top of that they have to pay another $200,000 for the permit to build, then when they come out with their rent, it's going to be exorbitant because they have to make money back on the investment. That's the whole reason of the deregulation. It's the whole reason of dropping certain tax rates or certain permit costs. And that's all just for the government to collect more and more money. That's why Trump was so successful at doing it, because he was good at making deals in that case. I have another piece from Market Watch. The U.S. economy is ready to surge, and so is inflation. I just want to go through this very quickly. So I've gone over how the government defunds your bank accounts through inflation rates. They make their debt easier to pay while making your bank account less value. Also, additionally, when they continue, and I was listening to an economist talk about this the other day, when they continue to lower the rates, lower the interest rates, that does not benefit you. That does not benefit a regular middle class working person, working family, because you need, in order to get those loans, those low interest loans, you need to have some sort of collateral. In general, regular working class people, the only collateral that they hold, a powerful or strong, a high value collateral that they hold themselves, is their houses. That's really it. Business owners, really rich dudes, they hold a lot of collateral. So for them, what they do is they just keep taking loans out with very low interest to keep up with the economy, which increases the inflation rate even more because they know that they're going to be able to pay it back because they have the collateralized funds. And they also know the interest they're going to end up getting it back on whatever they're going to invest it in is better than what the loan requires to be paid back. So this actually hurts the middle class more than anything. Keeping these loans really low, these interest rates, the only time it actually helps us, interest rates in the middle class, these low interest rates, the only time it helps us, especially in this case, where the economy is in the trash can, it only helps us when buying a house. Other than that, there is absolutely nothing else that that keeping these interest rates so low actually helps us. Maybe if we were a small business owner, maybe that could help us there, but in general, it's much more beneficial to the rich guys to have this, and then it sets off more and more inflation for us, and they get more and more money, and they end up being okay because they're investing the money, and they're keeping up with the market, they're keeping up with the inflation rate, whereas the person, the regular middle-class worker, that you thought the responsible, smart thing to do was to keep your money in the bank account, you are now getting defunded by the government and by the big businesses. They're just taking advantage of the Fed. The Fed's talking about keeping interest rates really low to try to prop up the economy right now. So another thing I had was AOC's wrong about the $22 minimum wage in Denmark. I just wanted to point out to the economic illiteracy of AOC. She was talking about how people in Denmark get $22 minimum wage. That sounds fine. That's around $45,000 a year. She also did not say anything about Denmark's taxes. Denmark pays about 50% of everything they make. And then on top of that, there's a value added on purchases. There's a sales tax that's 25% on most purchases on top of that. So when you got 50% of your money being taken from you, that's now $22,500 a year that you actually get to bring home as a Danish citizen after getting that minimum wage. So really, at the end of the day, everything's relative. It's not the same. It pretty much comes out to the same amount of money if you were making a minimum wage and you're working full time in America, especially in terms of the cost of goods and products over there. The cost of everything over there is much more expensive. I just thought that was worth mentioning because what they do is they like to point to Denmark, who actually has a lower population than New Jersey, and we're supposed to apply some sort of policy that goes on in a country made up of like 9 million people, in a country that's made up of 330 million people, and we're supposed to somehow take that. It's like the practices from other countries that work, and they're nowhere near similar to us in the way they run their economy or their population. They're also homogenous ethnically. They're all like super, super white. We're supposed to take super white policies and just bring them over here. I just think it's kind of ironic that the party that always talks about race all the time, you got all the homogeneously white society over there that doesn't even like accept immigrants to become citizens in that country. I'm pretty sure there's like a very strict standard to become a citizen over in Denmark and a lot of these Nordic countries. We're going to take their idea and we're going to bring it to the United States. For the party that's always worried about race. So next I have, this is going to be my last segment of the show. I know I'm running a little bit long, which is okay. I have a lot of content today, but this is the Second Amendment, on the Second Amendment front. You know, the Democrats going for universal background checks. This is a Daily Signal piece. They had H.R. 8 and then H.R. 1446. So they passed two different bills through the House recently. The House passed a gun control bill Thursday that requires a universal background check for every purchase of a firearm. H.R. 8, titled Bipartisan Background Checks Act of 2021, and led by California Democratic Representative Mike Thompson and Georgia Democratic Representative Lucy McBath. It passed 227 to 203 with 8 Republicans voting in favor. Republicans, good luck winning your next election, your next nomination. Republicans, however, accosted H.R. 8 and H.R. 1446. So 1446 is the other one, which is another bill set to pass Thursday that gives the government 10 days instead of 3 days to complete a background check when purchasing a firearm as a direct attack on American Second Amendment rights. And I'll explain. First, H.R. 1446, this whole 10-day, I was reading into it. It lays all the accountability away from the government. It lays all the accountability on the gun owner and the federal firearms licensor or the gun seller. So if the government doesn't get back to you, that's not their fault. If they don't get back to you in those 10 days that are required, rather than the 3 days, they're going to do a new 10-day system. Then they have 30 days to do it. And if they don't get that, then you have to write it down as the federal firearms licensor, and you have to go get audited by the ATF, and you have to do... It's all these rules that are being imposed on the buyer and the seller, and the government is getting less responsibility in this case, and all the responsibility is being burdened on us ourselves to handle these, to handle the regulations. It's not the government that's handling the regulations. They're not doing it in their own manner. They're not doing it competently or effectively. They're throwing all the responsibility on the gun owner and the gun seller. And then the other one, the bipartisan background check, which I think is, I mean, they're both pretty pernicious. This one's pretty pernicious. It's much more pernicious, I think. You need a background check for every single transfer of a firearm. That's the idea through this one. This one is the idea of having a list, composing a list of people, and the whole they're coming for your guns thing. This is to help serve that purpose, to have a registration list of people. Every single time a firearm is exchanged or it's transferred, you would need a background check. It would make it easier to start, and then from here, then the answer is going to be, okay, next we're going to go to a list. Because already, if you have a background check on the books, the government knows that there was some sort of background check. They don't know exactly how many guns were transferred, but they knew there's a background check for those guns. Then the next move is going to be, oh, we have these background checks. They're still not working. We need a registration for every single gun owner. And that's really what the next move is going to be from them. So in this case, this does not stop any mass shootings, by the way. All the mass shootings that happen, if there was universal background checks, it wouldn't have made a difference in the last couple of years. The universal background check makes no difference. That's the first thing. Second thing is, when people go to commit a crime, they don't think in the back of their head, oh, well, at least let me go legally obtain the firearm. If you're going to rob a bank, you don't care about getting a legal firearm. You go, oh, I'm already robbing the bank, so at this point it doesn't matter if I do another illegal thing. This does not help anybody. This only hinders the working class Second Amendment gun-toting citizen, as they would call us. It's the only thing it does. And next, another bill that they just threw up too. on this. Senate Democrats introduce a bill to ban assault weapons that includes 205 gun models. This is written by Liz George. It is the American Military News. Senate Democrats introduced legislation that would ban 205 assault weapons Thursday, just hours after the House passed the other two gun control bills. Introduced by Senator Dianne Feinstein after legislation called the legislation is called the Assault Weapons Ban of 2021, would also outlaw magazines capable of holding more than 10 rounds, and is co-sponsored by 34 other Senate Democrats. According to press release from Feinstein, the bill bans any, and this is, by the way, this bill is probably the most intrusive ban of all time. When it comes to, or they call it assault weapons. They don't even know, they can't even define what an assault weapon is, because in the state of New Jersey, the definition of an assault weapon and the definition here of her version of an assault weapon are totally different in this case. They're totally two completely different things. So they don't even know what an assault weapon is. They just call it an assault weapon because there's a trope to it. It has a negative connotation. It makes it sound way worse than it actually is. An assault weapon, a military-style weapon. They don't even know anything. Most of these things are cosmetic, but this one is probably the strongest one I've ever seen, or the most intrusive one that I've ever seen. So it bans any assault weapon, and once again, they don't define what an assault weapon is. So any weapon, I would think, any firearm, with a capacity to utilize a magazine that is not a fixed ammunition magazine, and has one or more military characteristics, including a pistol grip, a forward grip, a barrel shroud, a threaded barrel, or a folding or telescoping stock. So, in New Jersey, their assault weapons ban, they call it. You can have a detachable magazine. In this case, it's a fixed magazine, which I'll explain what that is. You can have a detachable magazine, and you can have two or more. I think it's once you hit one or more, or two, you can have one of the following. You can have a pistol grip, you can have a forward grip. Forward grip actually isn't even involved in that. But you can have a pistol grip in New Jersey. You're okay with having a pistol grip. A pistol grip, for you who are unaware, it's that, let's see. You see this little here? You see this here? Let me see if I got it on the screen. Black Rifle Coffee. This is the pistol grip right here, where your trigger finger is, where your trigger finger holds. This gives you extra grip on the firearm. Okay? So that is the pistol grip. So they are saying anything, in this case, Senator Feinstein, anything that is not a fixed ammunition magazine and has one of those is automatically an assault weapon is banned. Okay? So if you want a detachable magazine, one that you could pull in and out. So a fixed magazine would be this part right here cannot be pulled out. The magazine cannot be pulled out with the rounds. To pull it out and throw an extra mag in, each and every reload has to be reloaded by putting the gun down, taking the rounds or the bullets, and putting them in the magazine. You can't pull the magazine out and put a new magazine in. It's fixed. Which is, I mean, you know how long it would take you at the gun range if you couldn't do that? I mean, it's just a way to hinder the gun owner. Once you run out of rounds, it's pretty much over for you. In this case, if you were to defend yourself, you run out of rounds, and they also want it to be only 10 rounds, no more than 10 rounds. So in this case, this one is very intrusive, this one's very tyrannical, and it is in a infringement on the Second Amendment, obviously. This one's absolutely, it's insane. So if you don't have, let's say you have a detachable magazine, right? You can have that, but you can't have a pistol grip. You can't have this little piece right here that you hold where the trigger is. Then that means you have to have one of those old style guns that you hold like this, like the Car 90 AK, like an M14, very similar to an M14, which is fine, but there's different reasons tactically to have it the other way. It's just the idea that there's an infringement and it's okay, and they can just go forward with legislation like this. And it goes on this piece, and I think this is what Feinstein claims, and what she claims is wrong. She states, and I quote, "It's been 17 years since the original assault weapons ban expired, and the plague of gun violence continues to grow in this country. To be clear, this bill saves lives," Feinstein claimed in her announcement of the bill. When it was in place from 1994 to 2004, gun massacres declined by 37% compared with the decades before. After the ban expired, the number of massacres rose by 183%. So the Department of Justice, and you say, oh wow, those stats are really impressive. The Department of Justice National Institute of Justice issued a report in 2004 stating that the assault weapons ban from 1994 did not actually reduce crime. And this is what a report from the Washington Times states. We cannot clearly credit the ban with any of the nation's recent drop in gun violence, and indeed there has been no discernible reduction in the lethality and injuriousness of gun violence. And that's straight from the report. So to lay this out, so you say, oh, gun massacres, they decline. Well, to begin with, gun massacres weren't being done with these rifles. They're being done with pistols. So them banning these rifles didn't make a difference. That's why they came out with this report, because rifles in a general sense at this time were not being used for these gun massacres. The gun massacres in general, I think the number is like crazy. It's something like 90 to 95% of all gun deaths are by pistol, and then the rest of the percentage goes to shotguns and rifles. So most of the firearms and most of the gun deaths are directly related to pistols rather than rifles. So if they go and they ban rifles, here's the next idea. If they ban rifles completely in their entirety, then who's to say, well, look at this, nothing has changed. We haven't reduced gun violence at all or gun deaths at all. Let's go forward and let's also ban pistols. That's the next step after that. It's all progressive steps. It's incremental augmentations of tyrannical policy. And that's how they get stuff like this passed through. And to end here, the very end of this piece is the Washington, or I have the Blaze, and the Washington Post has been reporting on a crisis at the border, and straight from the Blaze article quoting the Washington Post. It's written by Paul Shiver. But first I want to play with Jen Psaki. They ask her about what's going on the border with the numbers, and here is her answer. Play 8.
There are reports out there that the number of unaccompanied migrants detained at the border has tripled in the last 2 weeks to 3,200 plus. Is that number accurate?
I'm not going to confirm numbers from here. Obviously, the Department of Homeland Security and others oversee the programs and the engagements that happen at the border. I will say that there are a couple of reasons. I know Amr asked about our kind of change in policy, but there are a couple of reasons why we think people are coming to the border.
Won't you confirm that number? That's a very important number.
We've been very clear that there is an increase, that there are more children coming across the border than we have facilities for at this point in time. Those numbers are tracked by the Department of Homeland Security, so I'm just suggesting that you talk to them about specifics.
Well, we talked to them, Jen. They won't confirm the numbers.
Well, I would encourage you to go back to them and ask them again. We're not going to confirm them from the White House. It's not our program. It's the Department of Homeland Security.
The department is the White House.
So there's a clear crisis at the border currently. The current administration will not release the numbers. They're saying to go to the DHS. The DHS, just so everybody knows, is part of the executive branch, so it is under the president's discretion. It's under the executive power, so they can get those numbers. There's no problem them getting those numbers. They're not going to, because they're embarrassing, because they don't want to open themselves up to scrutiny. They know the numbers. The numbers, I think, are something like a tripling of the amount of children at the border, and the whole kids in cages, which the Washington Post is actually reporting now that kids are in cages, from what it seems like, according to the piece. It starts off, in a shocking report published Wednesday, the Washington Post didn't shy away from characterizing the situation as a crisis, noting its magnitude came into clearer focus Wednesday as the new administration was holding record numbers of unaccompanied migrant teens and children in detention centers for far longer than legally allowed, and federal health officials fell further behind in their race to find space from them in shelters. So they're finding issues. They don't have enough room. More than 8,500 migrant teens and children who cross the border without their parents are being housed in Department of Health and Human Services shelters as they wait to be placed with relatives or vetted sponsors. Nearly 3,500 more are stuck at Border Patrol stations waiting for beds in those shelters to open up, the highest figure ever. So they have 8,500 are being housed, and then 3,500 are waiting in these Border Patrol stations. But the most important part is they're breaking their own federal policy. The news outlet, as in the Washington Post, went on to say that the migrant children are being held in grim steel and concrete cells built for adults, known as Border Patrol surge facilities, for an average of 107 hours, while they await transfer to an HHS run shelter. That time period is well over the 72-hour legal limit. So you have the current administration is breaking the legal bounds. They do have a crisis at the border. They have run out of facilities. When similar surge facilities were briefly opened during former President Trump's tenure, Democratic lawmakers and immigration activists alike lashed out at the administration for carelessly stuffing kids in cages on the campaign trail. Biden decried the practice as representative of his Republican opponent's tough stance on illegal immigration and vowed to adopt a more welcoming approach, but the situation is far worse under Biden than it ever was under Trump, and it hasn't even been 2 months into the new president's term. So they referred to this as, the situation at the border right now is they have kids in cages, and it's the way they referred to it, or whatever situation was going on in Trump's administration, which actually, to be honest with you, I don't even know if Trump actually had kids in cages. Whatever that situation is, whatever happened, is exactly what's happening in this current administration. And they're attempting to cover it up, and the media is not reporting on it. So it goes on, this piece. Young people are waiting in cramped, austere holding cells with concrete floors and benches. Lights remain on 24 hours a day, agents say, and there are a few places to play. The Post report continued. The outlet noted that the largest number of children held in surge facilities under Trump was about 2,600 in June 2019. Internally aware that the situation is bad and only getting worse, the Department of Homeland Security projects at least 117,000 unaccompanied migrant children will illegally enter the country this year. The Biden administration has been scrambling to come up with solutions. Last month, the administration authorized officials to purchase plane tickets to fly migrant children to relatives within the U.S., but according to the Post, even that radical action has not been enough to keep up with the influx. So the report states, over the first week of March, the HHS received more than 450 migrant teens and children per day on average, roughly 3 times as many as the agency was able to release to family members and sponsors. So they're not even able to handle the influx of people that are at the border. And you ask, what is up with the sudden increase? Why is it there's been this sudden increase? Why are these kids being kept in these facilities that under Trump were considered kids in cages? But under Biden, it's not of the sort. Trump, the most he had in a surge facility was 2,600. So right now we have many more. We have 8,500 right now in those facilities. And of those 8,500, I mean, just think about the math on that. That's like a 3-time increase that we have currently. And the reason for this is people ask, oh, well, why is that suddenly now there's this surge at the border? Well, check it out. Biden, he incentivized this the entire time. Play clip 2.
Under your plan, would the 11, 12 million undocumented immigrants that live in the United States that have been here many for generations, would they have access to health insurance?
Yes, if they can buy into the system like everybody else. That's like
because in ACA they can't.
Yeah, I know. Well, they can. That's my point. They continue to be able to do that.
They cannot under the Obamacare.
Well, that's my point. They will, though. They will be able to buy.
Last June.
But nobody is going to be deported in my first 100 days until we get through the point that we find out the only rationale for deportation will be whether or not you've committed a felony while in the country.
Should undocumented immigrants arrested by local police be turned over to immigration officials?
No.
So just to list the different incentives. The incentives were, you come to this country, you get free health care. That's the first one. And there's many. There's like 6 or 7 different clips. I cut it down just for the sake of time. The other one is, no one's getting deported in my first 100 days. Unless if you're a felon. Which actually, they're not even deporting people that are felons now. They shut down that program. They shut down the program where they were going after sexual assaulters or people that are involved with the human trafficking trade. They shut that down. And then the very last one is, okay, so if you catch people in sanctuary cities, are you going to let the ICE authorities know of that? And his answer is no. So pretty much they're disbanding ICE at this point. ICE is useless. If you're going to have ICE not do their job, then they're useless. So this has been incentivized by the Biden administration and the campaign while he's running. And that's really it. I mean, it is what it is. He screwed it up. This is what they want, and this is unfortunately what's going to happen. I think there's some poll numbers coming out that aren't looking so beneficial for Biden. And we'll see what ends up happening. The midterms, apparently, there's going to be a huge reckoning. They're saying Herschel Walker is going to run against Warnock over in Georgia, which would be pretty awesome for the Senate seat. And I think that Herschel Walker would destroy him. I don't even think it would be close. So very end, speaking of Georgia too, and this is all I had other than everything on the show. Georgia failed to produce a chain of custody for 404,000 absentee ballots. This is a national file piece. I highly suggest you check it out. It's just simply they were unable to audit those 404,000 votes, absentee ballots, which is a very high percentage of the ballots. I want to say it was something like 25% of the ballots or something of that nature. I mean, it was a huge amount that they were unable to audit through their system. So that's really it. I greatly appreciate everyone for tuning in. I know I went a little bit long today. And yes, please drop the mic, let people know about the podcast, and I will see you all on Monday. Thank you.